Hi folks, Rob Goller. Thanks for joining me for our weekly chat about local history. This week I'm going to chat about my most recent column in the East Aurora Advertiser, my monthly newspaper column. And as some of you know, I'm going to be incorporating a lot of these newspaper columns and research, in addition to some new research I've done into a series of books coming up. So stay tuned for that. But this idea for this column came from Don Vidler, as he had written me some questions about the history of 5 and 10s in East Aurora, and I answered the question that he had, and then went down this massive rabbit hole of discovering that there were other 5 and 10s in East Aurora, and of course Vidler's is the most famous one today, most prominent, draws in tourists and shoppers and even local folks quite a bit, due to its nostalgia. And because there's not a lot of 5 and 10s around, so we take for granted this 5 and 10. But in every small community, there were several 5 and 10s, and they've all but disappeared. But Vidler's is still there, of course. So Vidler's has survived the changes in how we shop and the economy, changes in the economy over the years. So this research that I did into this story of Vidler's, the story of 5 and 10s in East Aurora, is actually indicative of how the economy's changed in any community across the country, small towns across the United States. It's not just relative to East Aurora. So as I was delving into it, as is the case with all the research that I do in the columns that I write, is I have a ton more research and a ton more information that I'm able to put in the newspaper column and into the articles that I write. So this is kind of fun to be able to chat a little bit more about what went into my research and the thinking and some of the extra information that I was able to find. Now, Mr. Vidler, Don Vidler, had thought that, and we all thought that there were several 5 and 10s along Main Street, and there still were. However, there weren't as many as we had thought. So it turns out that there were 3 stores at one time, and we thought that there were more than that, but it turned out that the one store had just changed owners over several years. So there were three different names, 3 different stores in one location over several years. So yes, 3 different 5 and 10s, but they weren't operating at different times. So that could be considered one single store. So to go back to the beginning, and I put a link to the article. Please feel free to visit the article and read it for all the details. But Mr. Vidler, now 5 and 10s had been popular for several years, but they hadn't come to East Aurora. And it's interesting, I won't give away the ending of my article if you get to the bottom, but Vidler's wasn't the first. However, there was a gap, and Robert Vidler Sr. had decided to open a store. He called it the Fair. It was located where it is located today in the original section. Only half of that original section, which is interesting. And he opened this new concept at the time for East Aurora of a 5 and 10. And the idea was that you would undercut the department stores, bigger stores. You would be able to provide a niche market for everyday household items and thread and pots and pans, perhaps, but things under $1. I note in the article that the store started out in the 1800s as 5 and 10s, 5 cents and 10-cent items, but of course with inflation they had to increase the price, and of course today Vidler sells things obviously over $1. But the idea was that you could go in and everything would be under $1. And you could find various household items and needs. And so he opens the store, and he says in announcing the opening of the store that East Aurora has needed this kind of store for quite some time. Well, according to local legend, and the store Vidler's has this on their website, is I believe, but either way, it's been told over and over, is that the shop owners on Main Street were so convinced that this idea was stupid that Mr. Vidler would go out of business in a short time, and that they were taking bets on how long Mr. Vidler would stay in business with this 5 and dime concept, that it just couldn't work. You couldn't make enough money off of that. Well, it turns out not only did Mr. Vidler last several years, but within the first year of Vidler's being open, another 5 and dime opened. And so if the idea was so bad, why was someone else coming in trying to take advantage of that concept, which I found very interesting. So if Mr. Vidler if his idea of a 5 and 10 was so dumb, why was somebody else coming in with that idea? So Mr. Vidler was onto something. And so that store opened a block away from Vidler's, a block west. Um, and I note in the article exactly where all these places were, but it was Mr. Eastman and his dad joined, and so it was F and F Eastman, 5 and 10, and they opened with a splash, and they were talking about how much better they were than other stores. Mr. Vidler's his interest must have been piqued when he saw that that store was opening. Um, and we would like to think they were friendly rivalries, but perhaps not in some cases. But Eastman's opens with a splash. Lots of ads in the newspaper, big articles in the paper that Mr. Eastman's opening the store. Now, they lasted for about a decade, but Vidler survived this, won this rivalry. And there was a going out of, they didn't call it a going out of business, they called it a stock reduction sale. And there was no indication that they were going to close. Eastman's was going to close. But they had the stock reduction sale, and there's actually a photo in the newspaper, and I wish I could have included more information about it, but there were lines outside the door at Eastman's to buy this stock reduction sale. Well, it turns out the stock reduction sale was a going out of business sale, because within a couple weeks, the store was closed. And so I know in the article that I said that Mr. Vidler was probably breathing a sigh of relief, taking a breath, because his competition at 5 and 10, just a block away, had gone out of business. But he couldn't breathe easy for long, because the store just switched owners. So someone else with the 5 and 10 concept came in, a man named Paul R. Day, and he opened a 5 and 10. They actually had a big to do about his opening, and he promised a modern store, all new items, a refreshed storefront. He actually closed for a little bit in order to remodel the store, and to one up Vidler's and one up the other stores that they were competing with. And then the Paul R. Day store was a block away, another 5 and 10. So that's part of the 5 and 10s that were located in the same location. Now, in the meantime, a store opened. You thought the competition was close, just being a block away. Mr. Gannon opened. Now, a lot of these folks that were opening the stores had previous experience with Montgomery Ward, Woolworths, some of the bigger 5 and 10s. I note interestingly in the article that even though Seymour Knox was a cousin of Woolworths, and he actually made his early fortunes in 5 and 10s. Never, even though he later opened, had his estate at the western end of town with the horses, the Knox State Park today, he never opened a store in East Aurora. So Knox or Woolworths never had a 5 and 10 in East Aurora. But the people who cut their teeth at those stores came to East Aurora and opened up their 5 and 10s here on their own. So Gannon, Mr. Eastman and Mr. Gannon both had experience in the 5 and 10s previously to coming to East Aurora. Now, Mr. Gannon, so if Eastman's store and Paul Day's store a block away seemed close, Mr. Gannon opened a store 2 doors down to the east. And Racha Lynn is actually in the building today, and it was an old grocery store, and it's located at 704 Main Street. So you go past the alley next to Vidler's, and you go 2 storefronts down, and that's where Gannon's was, and they opened a 5 and 10. And so at beginning at that point, it was right after World War II, 1945, that Mr. Gannon opened his store. Vidler's had been in business for 15 years. These 5 and 10s had survived World War II, and then now we have 3 5 and 10s on Main Street: the Paul Day store, Vidler's, and Gannon's, all within 2 blocks of each other. And the competition was evident in the articles in the Advertiser, in the advertisements in the Advertisers, especially at back-to-school time, at Christmas time. They would try to outbeat each other, promoting their toy sections. That was a pretty big Pretty big deal at Christmas time, claiming they had the biggest toy section, the best toy section, Vidler's, East, Paul Day, and and Gannon's, so right after the war, we had these three 5 and 10s. Now, the question I was thinking, it's like, a town of East Aurora size, a village of East Aurora size, how could we support three 5 and 10s? Well, we did for a while. Actually, from after World War II up until 1960, so about 15 years, we had three 5 and dimes on Main Street, which is quite interesting. Now, Paul Day, the third change in ownership or second change in ownership, third owner of that store, Paul R. Day closed his store, moved away, and a new gentleman moved in and opened up another 5 and dime. But there was a chain of 5 and dimes called Ben Franklin, and you might be familiar with it. And he opened up under the Ben Franklin name as sort of a franchise of the Ben Franklin. Now, he claimed in ads, and he probably knew that people wanted to support local business, and he claimed that, even though it was a Ben Franklin store, it would be original items, and that he was actually the owner of the store, even though it was under the Ben Franklin name. So again, that still remained three 5 and 10s in East Aurora. Now, Vidler's, seeing this actually after World War II was a busy time, they changed their name to Vidler's. It was the fair for a while, and they changed their name to Vidler's. And they put an addition on the back of the store, the addition we know today, that goes downstairs, so the basement part in the back, and created a bigger toyland for the sale of toys. And that was in the 1950s. And then Bob and Ed, so Mr. Vidler Sr.'s sons, after World War II, joined the store full time. And the store, it's so funny that it started in just one half of that original section upstairs. Then it expanded. Mr. Vidler bought the building, expanded into the two sections. So 2 aisles became 3 aisles, 4 aisles, and then the basement was added on later. And these were all probably in response to upping the competitive edge with other 5 and 10s in East Aurora. So the late 1950s come along, and there were a couple things that happened that brought an end to two of the 5 and 10s, and brought an end to the 5 and 10 rivalry in East Aurora. The plaza at the other end of town, the Aurora Village Shopping Center, opened, and a retail giant named W.T. Grant, many of you might remember that if you're old enough, was the anchor store. And a lot of reports over time we had seen in books and newspaper articles over time, they're saying that the two 5 and 10s, Gannon's and the Ben Franklin store, closed as a result of the competition from the plaza. That after within 2 years or a couple years of the plaza opening, these stores closed. It was actually before the plaza even opened. I have a feeling that the plaza was just the last nail in the coffin. And what was happening is that the way we shopped changed in the 50s and 60s, especially going into the 60s. People just weren't going to go to several small stores. And this happened with grocery stores in the 1970s. It's the trend. We had small little grocery stores. This is something I couldn't get into in the article. It would have been too long. But Hub's grocery store, the small little, a lot of you remember the Park Grocery, Mr. Hub's. And he actually said when they closed in the 1970s, is nobody goes to these small little grocery stores anymore. They go to the supermarkets. So all these supermarkets were opening, and people wanted one-stop shopping. They didn't have time. More women were working outside the home, and there was less domestic time, less time to go shopping. More people were buying their groceries for the entire week. They weren't going to the store every single day to buy the food for that night's dinner. And the same was happening with supplies like that 5 and 10s would sell. So you were seeing these giant, bigger variety stores, and 1958 and 59, Seaman Hood and Morey, a store that many of you might remember, which was located almost immediately next to the Ben Franklin store, expanded. So this smaller department store expanded into this very well publicized large department store, and that was in 58, 59. Then the plaza opens in 1960, and these two 5 and 10s go out of business at the same time. Not a coincidence. So these larger the way we shop in is the grocery stores you see opening, the shopping the supermarkets, excuse me, your Loblaws, your New Way markets were opening, and it was you could get your meat and your produce and all in one place, as opposed to going to the meat market and a smaller grocery store to get cereal. You didn't go to various little stores. People didn't have time to do that anymore. Same thing was happening with the department stores. People wanted to go into one store and buy everything that they could. So that's what led to the downfall of two of the three 5 and 10s in East Aurora. And what I find interesting is that they were so busy worrying about each other. You could see it in the newspaper ads throughout the years, the competition between Vidler's and Gannon's and Vidler's and Ben Franklin, all that. And it turns out it wasn't each other that brought an end that caused them to close. It was the other stores, the Plaza, Seaman Hood and Maury, bigger department stores, easier transportation to Buffalo, to go downtown to go shopping into these bigger department stores, and so that the way we shopped changed, and so that's what led to the closing of the two 5 and 10s. My opinion. Now Vidler's, the reason definitely why they're still around is they took that 5 and 10 niche, the nostalgia of 5 and 10s. They rebranded. I talk about this in the article. And Vidler's talks about it too. They had Rick Jennings, a local artist, rebrand the store into that red and white awning look that we see today. And they ended up, now they get that the people that come to go to the old-fashioned 5 and 10, and taking advantage of the fact that they are very rare, that there's no 5 and 10s aren't around anymore. And of course, Vidler's has expanded many times over the years on Main Street. And one of the last note I have is that I found very interesting about the 5 and 10s, is that W.T. Grant that I talked about, they went bankrupt in the 70s, the large department store, and Vidler's is still around. So the big department store was just a couple decades of a fad, and you'll see that today even now too, where your big department stores are closing, the brick and mortar, and they go through cycles. But I found it very interesting that the stores that Seaman Hood Maury they sold out to a Buffalo, the Sample, and eventually moved down to the Plaza. But these bigger department stores are no longer around, at least under the names that they were, and Vidler's is still there. So I found that very interesting, that the mega department store that everyone was worried about in late 1950s and 1960s is not around anymore, and Vidler still is. So I invite you, thanks for listening to all. I've had fun doing this research, and again, it was a rabbit hole that I went down. But if you want to know more, read the article, The East Aurora Advertiser, and it will be in an upcoming book, I think, because a lot of people ask me about that. And I, through that rabbit hole, was able to clear up some of the questions that we had about the other 5 and 10s in East Aurora. We've been trying to get to the bottom of it. And again, a big resource that I use is the East Aurora Advertiser Archives. Local newspapers, no matter what community you're researching, are very invaluable. And that's how I found all this information, especially in this case. I use a lot of sources, but in this case, the advertisements for the 5 and 10s, the announcements of the stores openings and all that, that was invaluable. And again, this story about 5 and 10s, you can go to any community, and so I'm hoping if you're not even from East Aurora, you'd find this interesting. This live stream, as well as the article, is that same progression of how we shop impacted every small town, just like East Aurora. So in the 50s and the 60s, it started to change into the department store, and the supermarkets started coming around, and the smaller grocery stores were closing. And that's just the way the progression worked, regardless of what town you were in. So East Aurora was not immune to national trends that were happening. So again, thank you for joining me. If you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the hopper. Send them either through a comment or some people send me a private message. I appreciate that as well. Um, I have a couple ideas coming up that are going to be a little more edgy. So thanks for those ideas. I've had to put them on the back burner for a bit, but we'll chat about those. And as always, thank you for keeping history alive. I am Robert Lowell Goller. I'm the town and village historian, but these videos and a lot of my research are not connected officially with my duties as town and village historian. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Until then, take care.